السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. It's our pleasure today to have our two guest speakers from Belgium, Mr. Ludo Pease and Mr. Michel Duvolfs. And we are talking about very important topic today about measuring the unmeasurable. How can you calculate the value of your non-tangible assets? Actually, I know Ludo more than maybe 11 years now, and Michel for more than 6-7 years now. And we wanted for some time to do this presentation, but we at last we could do it. This presentation is very important today with two experts in the intellectual capital and knowledge management, and it helps with this very knowledge economy. It can help a lot of people to quantify and calculate their non-tangible assets. So I leave now the space for both Ludo and Michel to present for us this presentation. And please feel free, if you have any questions, you can put it on the chat box and we can have some questions and answers at the end of the session. Okay? Thank you so much and best of luck.
Okay,
perfect.
so
Shall I start?
Ludo,
Yeah,
just a little word from your side, then a little word from me, and then you have the floor.
all right. Okay, fine. So I'm the founder president from Areopa. Let me give you a little bit background. I worked till 1987, as you can see, for Hewlett-Packard. I was in HP, the worldwide intellectual capital, not intellectual capital, but change management specialist in implementing organization development concepts for Hewlett-Packard worldwide. I left HP in 1987 and became then, the founder of Areopa. At that time, it was a company that was focusing on the implementation of large change management projects within multinationals, which I was doing for 9 years in Hewlett-Packard. And so that was actually the start of the Areopa organization. I will tell you later a little bit more about what the evolution was that we went through. But it's not so easy to always present yourself that I am a visiting professor in a lot of business schools worldwide, talking about intellectual capital accounting and measuring intangible assets, because that is something that is most of the time always a lot of people talk about it, but not so many people do the effort to go to all the details to be able to measure it. And that's the topic that we are going to cover today. Of course, it doesn't need any explanation that my track record from 1987 till today includes so many big organizations for who I worked on top management level, middle management, in M&A situations, etc. I was a member in many, or not even a member, but I was also instrumental in the creation of the research and innovation strategy from the European Commission, where we were defining how the market should be supported by the European Commission in the new knowledge development era. I am today also, which is not mentioned on this slide, and also a founding partner of a company called Lanterna Capital in Luxembourg. Lanterna Capital is actually a finance company. We give money in debt and equity to SMEs, from startups till large organizations up to 3,000 people. We have no limit in amount of money, but it's all based on the measuring on and the management of intangible assets. And that makes it very special that we are linking actually intellectual capital with financing and money. And I always say, if you cannot talk about money, then nobody listens to you. And that's what we are going to address today. Michel, your turn.
Okay, well, I have to apologize, and that's what I always say, but I am a former banker. I'm healed. I'm taking a pill every morning. I was first in a local bank, Gemeentekrediet. Then I was operation manager in payments for ABN AMRO, worldwide bank, but I was operations manager for Belgium. Then I was an independent interim manager that did some projects for DHL, Belgium Post, BNP, another bank again. And there was a lead in all my assignments. It was always about digital statistics, IT, after sales, and those things. The first time I met Ludo, I had the great joy, in fact, to work on the econometric models that we were customizing, making. At that moment, it was 2004, 2005, and that was not even the first range of formulas. And then I joined again in 2015, and I'm still working together with a lot of fun and joy together with Ludo. And I have to tell you, intellectual capital is something I need, because it's, how would I say it, intellectually, it's something, it is going out of the box. It makes you think out of the box. And it gives you a drive to know what can we do with it, etc., etc. So now together with a number of colleagues, and I saw that Pete is also here and joining us in this session. And of course, together with Ludo, we are chasing our people that are working, well, let's say around the world. And Mohammed is one of them, and I'm chasing him like we did to have this session. And we help them to talk about intellectual capital and to make people know and make people aware of what we do and we can do. Ludo, up to you.
Okay, before we go into the discussion and the presentation, let me take you first through a journey. And it will picture a little bit the context of where we came from and why we did things and why we didn't do things. After I tell you that journey, we will take you half an hour through that journey. Then Michelle will summarize it, and using all the slides that you can see here briefly. And then at the end, I think we can do some question and answers.
And we will share the presentation.
And let me first start with the story. Like I told you, I founded Areopa based on big change management projects for multinationals. And on a certain moment, it was in 1997, a friend of mine said to me, Ludo, don't you want to do an IPO with Areopa? Now, we were not so interested in doing an IPO. We were at that time 200 people. Today we are 450, to give you an idea of our organization of today. I was not so interested in doing that, but my friend, he was working as an investment banker in Banque Brussels Lambert at that time, which was a small investment bank who became now part of Fortis in BNP Fortis. They were looking for candidates at that time for doing an IPO in the London Stock Exchange. And the problem was, of course, that we always said, yeah, it's nice that you want to go to a stock exchange, but yeah, you need to have some assets to go to the stock exchange. And I was convinced that in our organization, the most important assets, like every manager is always saying, are the people. Yeah, and people are not the people, but the knowledge that they have are the most important assets in a knowledge economy. So in that sense, I was invited them to go and have a chat with the guys from the bank. And there were all those analysts sitting in front of me. And in a certain moment, they were asking me all the kind of questions on return on investments and that kind of stuff. And then suddenly I made a reflection when I was trained. I'm trained as an economist, and I remember very well that our professor in accounting, he told me at that time that accounting was based on the concepts of manufacturing companies. And manufacturing companies meaning basic goods in a warehouse, machine parks and finished goods in a warehouse again. And that was the basic principle. And they were always based on costs out of the past. Now, in that sense, what we then had is I say, listen, if you guys are talking about the knowledge economy, what you had in the past is not really what you need to do in the present. Let me give an example. If you are an IT company and you had in the past a lot of Java developers, the software packages that are not so used anymore these days, yeah, and you have still 10 of them, then in the classical accounting, they will be activated as the cost as an asset, and they will be considered as an asset. But today you don't use them anymore, so they are rather a liability rather than an asset. So in that sense, I said to the guys there from the bank, I said, I think that you guys are basing yourself on the wrong basic elements, because you should only look at the present and the future. The knowledge economy happens in the present and in the future, not in the past. So in that sense, you cannot build a knowledge company based on old-fashioned ways of thinking about intangible assets. For example, if you say that you have basic goods in a warehouse, machine parts and finished goods in a warehouse, the manufacturing concepts, yeah, you don't have that in the knowledge economy. The basic goods in a warehouse are brains, the machines are brains, and the products are brains again. And you cannot put them in warehouses, and they are not related and valued in costs. So I challenged the guys from the bank at that time with that knowledge. And I said, hey guys, I think that you are measuring with the wrong measure systems. Yeah, it will not work. And I have been proven right. Remember the dot-com bubble that happened in 1999, 2001, 2002. Yeah, and there you saw that this prediction that I made at that time became reality. The problem was that I said at the end of that meeting, I said to the guys, hey, listen, you guys think that I come from another planet, but I'm afraid that you guys are still in Jurassic Park when you think about the knowledge economy. And so I was gone. Now, coming back to Areopa offices, I said, well, it's strange that people are trying to explain knowledge companies in the same way as manufacturing companies, and that will never fly. And therefore, I said, you know what? We are going to invent the way to measure all the intangible assets of an organization. And I repeat it, all the intangible assets of an organization, yeah, not only brand or not only the value of the return on investment, for example, or the net present value calculation or discounted cash flow or things like that with our statistical techniques. And then I said, okay, let's invent this. So what we finally did without knowing what we were doing, to be honest, and I'm talking about here 1997, we said, well, why don't we start identifying what intangible assets really are? And intangible assets, in many cases, people try to define that like a brand, for example, or like human capital, or like, you know, but then you say, no, there is something more. And it's actually, if you think about it, pretty simple. When you say intangible assets, what is this? If you talk about the present and about the future, it's everything that you do that adds value to your organization. We call that an added value creating phenomena. For example, I recruit a person. I have a new IT system. I have a new partner. I have a new customer. I have a new structure. I have a new, and everything that you have new is always the intention to increase the value of the organization in present or in future. Now, if you start thinking like that, then you get suddenly a complete other vision on what intangible assets are. Because you can make a classification out of the 4 biggest categories. Because there are many books and everything like that that have been, in many cases, published and discussed, and everybody was always talking about the narratives of intellectual capital, and you know, and then we went from human capital, customer capital, philosophical capital, city capital, and call it. And we said on a certain moment, but wait a second, if we talk about intellectual capital, the fundamentals of it is not that. The fundamentals that we need to know are something else. It is not what you will see in all those concepts. They are what I call the added value creating phenomena. Now, to cut a long story short, what we did is we identified 77 added value creating phenomena. So it's the major categories are simple. There is human capital. If you see it from the standpoint of an entrepreneur, of a business, there is human capital, there is customer capital, there is strategic alliance and partner capital, and there is something that we call structural capital, which is actually all the things that are written down, yeah, captured, stored, and made reusable. In that sense, it also belongs to the individual. And here we have to make a big distinction already. That is that part of the knowledge, for example, that is used in an organization is what we call tacit. That means it's in the heads of the people. If they go away and they don't come back, you don't have the knowledge anymore. It's only when you capture it, store it, and make it reusable that you can consider it in your organization as an asset of the organization. So in that sense, we said, okay, if we are going to do that with those 4 categories, and there are no more. Yeah, there are more. In literature, you will find them many more. But we say, if you are an entrepreneur of a company, you only need the human capital, which is the knowledge of the people. You only need the knowledge of your customers. And what is that? Well, everybody knows that each time you start working with your customers, you learn from each experience. They always teach you something new. And the same with partners and alliances. And if you then structure it, that are the things that are important. Now, I said that within those 4 categories, we identified 77 added value creating phenomena. And we said at the end that intellectual capital is the added value minus the costs. And you will see later on in the presentation from Michel that we were then able to come up with a full accounting system that would show that in balance sheets. And that is, of course, pretty important, very important too. Now, in doing so, the 77 added value creating phenomena, let me give an example of that. If I said I recruit a person, but if you recruit a person, you don't recruit that individual. You don't recruit his CV. No. You recruit actually his networks that he has, his experience, his skills, his intelligence, his motivation, his environmental support. You know, that are the variables that you recruit actually, right? We call that the assets, the real assets. Now, if you take that and you can imagine that you can measure, yeah, what are networks related to a role that the person is going to do. And that role has a financial value. So in that sense, if I can say that the networks are worth 5 and then the experience is worth 12 and then so on with the skills and the intelligence and the motivation, and I multiply it with the financial element, then the output of that equation will be a monetary value. Now, the point is, of course, here that the big element here is that you have to measure in a standardized way all those variables and parameters, not only in a standardized way, but also in a validated way, that you're measuring what you pretend to measure. If I want to measure networks, then I should measure networks, and I should do it always at the same time, in the same way. Otherwise, I cannot compare one company with another, which is the essence of an accounting. Now, if you do all that, so what we did is we finally came up with what you would call the basis of econometric formulas. So what is an econometrics? Econometrics is actually a social phenomena that you see. I recruit a person, translate that into a mathematical formula. Yeah, that is networks plus experience multiplied with skills, multiplied with intelligence, multiplied with motivation, and that kind of stuff. That is an econometric formula. Now, the basic element to make such a formula valid is that you include all the variables and parameters. You should be able, if you say I recruit a person and you forget, for example, to put in networks, then your formula will not be very good and not stable. So you have to identify all the variables and all the parameters. Why do I tell you all that? Well, what we did, we identified the 77 added value creating phenomena of an organization. From each of them, yeah, from each of them, we were on that moment bringing everything together by saying if we do that for the 77, then we can calculate the total value of a company. Now, if you do that, that's nice, but there is an issue there. Because I remember that I said if you would calculate even the values, but it is in the heads of the people, it's not written down somewhere, it's not captured, stored, and made reusable, then it belongs to the individual. And that we call tacit knowledge. Tacit means it's in the heads of the person and it can run away. It doesn't belong to the company. Only when it is written down or afterwards captured, stored, and made reusable, then it belongs also to the company, and then it can start to have value. So we did that, and we did that for the full range of intangible assets that we had in an organization. So that the 77, that's what I mean. So in that sense, it's nice that you can calculate all that. If you do all those 77 equations, yeah, and that you have for each of the variables and parameters, there are 920, a measure system that is sustainable, standardized, and validated, then your outcome will be a stable and recognizable output. In money terms, tacit, explicit, and you can calculate it in present and future. Because a lot of, like I said in the beginning, intellectual capital is only valid in the present and in the future, not in the past. Now, what we then did is, what is then the future? Well, that are all the plans that you make. And in the processes should sustain all the plans that you make. If you say that you're going to conquer the world, but you don't have the people and the skills in your organization to do that, then your future is not stable. Or if you don't know who your key knowledge carriers are, and that you have a lot of tacit knowledge, lessons learned, cases, stories, little methodologies and tricks, yeah, and you don't capture that and store it, make it reusable, then you're very vulnerable for investments or that for somebody who is investing, because on that moment, your knowledge can run away, and that should not be the case. So what do we learn out of this? You can measure all the intangible assets of an organization. We call them added value creating phenomena. There are 77 of them. They consist out of 920 variables and parameters. If you measure them all in a sustainable way, standardized way, that's what we developed, and you put them in an econometric formula, your output will be tacit, explicit, present, and future. Now, that's all nice, but how do you report that? Because you can just do the calculations and show everybody those very complicated formulas. But if you just do that in a way that you are, how would I say, in a way that it's recognizable by a financial person, for example, yeah, then you come up in accounting terms. And that's what we did. We said we have to put the result of those calculations of those 77 formulas, yeah, on a balance sheet. But if you take the classical balance sheet, that's a cost balance sheet, yeah. That's all about costs out of the past. That are the costs that you made to create some output. That is the definition of classical accounting. Now, if you do that, yeah, of course, we say, no, the costs out of the past, that doesn't fit into our way of thinking. We are talking here about present and future. So what we say, sure, but in order to create your assets in present and future, you made costs anyway. So we made a little equation where we say intellectual capital is then added value minus the costs, right? Related to that intellectual capital assets, of course. It would lead us too far today to explain you the difference between the total operational cost and then the related intellectual capital related cost. But anyway, accept it that those two exist. Now, if you do that, and you say we are going to put it on a balance sheet, the only positive element on classical balance sheets is goodwill. And goodwill is the difference between book value and market value. And market value is what the fool wants to pay for it. Now, what the fool wants to pay for it, that is not something that is measurable. Yeah, because you know what the fool wants to pay for it. It means if I sell my company and I go and talk to somebody who wants to buy it, and I say the price is 10 million, and he says, and I only want to pay you 5 million, and then we bargain, and finally we agree on 6 million. Yeah, there is no foundation to prove that the 6 million is correct. It's a result of a negotiation. So in that sense, we say, well, if we do that way, Tobin skew, it's called, that's goodwill, that's the way that it is measured. This is based on what the fool wants to pay for it, and it is not, and that is what like you have also the stock exchange, and they are based on the same principles, what the fool wants to pay for it. But if you then go to the auditors, and you go to the international accounting standards, in international accounting standards number 38, it's called intangible assets, and it has 3 basic criteria. It says that an intellectual capital asset should be identifiable, should be controllable, and should have future economical benefit. Now, if we go back to the negotiation results, a negotiation is not identifiable where the value comes from, because it's an emotional feeling. Yeah, it's not controllable. You cannot control it in evolution. And surely you cannot see that the 6 million invested could have future economical benefit. Imagine that your key knowledge carriers would run away. So in that sense, we said, no, we are not going to put our results of our calculation in classical accounting in that little positive element, which is called goodwill. And we decided to create a complete new accounting system. And that new accounting system is called Icarus. Michel will show you later on how it looks like. But the nice thing is due to that little element that we had where we say intellectual capital is added value minus costs, we are able to consolidate the classical accounting balance sheets with the ones that we made. Now, we made a full new accounting. That means that we start with journal entries, with the ledgers, with the evaluation rules, everything that an accounting should be, with the balance sheets, with the accountable events. That the accountable events is very simple, are the 77 added value creating phenomena. For the rest, it has the same look and feel as classical balance sheets, and you will see it later on in the presentation. And that, of course, gives a lot of good face value on that moment already to the financial people. Now, that was nice. We could calculate it, we could account it. Still, we need to adapt a little bit on the audit standard, because the identifiability, controllability, and future economical benefit, that is the basis that we respect. But in the past, when they talked about intangible assets, people were activating costs out of my Java developers. Remember, where we have the cost activated, and if I don't need it anymore, it's a liability, it's not an asset. So the interpretation that was made in the EIS standards by a lot of auditors was still based on costs and not on added value creating phenomena like we would have it. So we also went to the EIS board in London 2004, 2008, where we then had our interpretation on how that should be, that was adapted and accepted. Now, all that is nice. So we could calculate it, we could account it, we could go to auditors, they have to put their stamp on it, but nobody is waiting for a new accounting. Everybody in an organization had already an accounting, and they say, not a double accounting, go away. So what we did, we said, oh, so people don't understand very well what you can do with it. And to cut a long story short, what we then did is we identified 104 application areas. What can you do with it if you have your intellectual capital calculated? You can go to a bank, you can go to an investor, you can go to in an M&A discussion, transfer pricing, you can calculate return on investments of your investments of trainings, or the return on investment calculation of budget spendings and things like that. So we identified 104 of this kind of application areas, which we all tested at least 200 companies for each of the application areas. So it gave us a tremendous amount of big data. And that, of course, was an interesting step into convincing people to say, look, that's the advantage in using it. We then developed what we call the 10-step implementation approach. because we said nobody is immediately going to implement 920 variables and parameters to measure. So what we came up with is, well, why don't we make a kind of a questionnaire from it, that we can talk to the people, and based on what they say, we can compare that in their evolution of the company. That means on the evolution, are they a startup or a scale up or that kind of phases? Yeah, that we then can say on that moment, okay, we have a lot of big data there, we have their questions there, we compared it, and we can make a perfect estimation on present and future value, tacit and explicit, from their own organization in not even a week time. Yeah, so that was a very big breakthrough. And the 10 steps is actually based on that we do what we call an high-level estimation. We then do an innovation due diligence, yeah, and then we go further into helping the managers to change tacit into explicit so that they create more value, that they can protect it, and most important is to create from each of the intangible assets multiple money streams, because if you don't have revenue from your assets, then they are worth nothing, right? And at the end, of course, if you do all those steps, it could be perfectly possible that on that moment you can have an intellectual capital accounting implemented. So all that we did, we then created afterwards what we call the supply chain, which is the environment in which we have to live with intangible assets. And then we came up with what we call an intellectual asset banking concept, where we give guarantees to commercial banks 100% if we can go into an SME, measure it, and that we then do an high-level estimation, innovation due diligence, we put the knowledge manager inside, and we guarantee with our fund, yeah, that the companies can do what they always wanted, and to get loans from the bank, because most of the banks don't give loans to innovative companies, even based on Basel III, that's even forbidden by them. So, but beside that, we also are looking at what we call special purpose funds concepts. We are organizing a rating organization to support all those investments, and that's where we are today. Yeah, so that was a little bit the story of where we came from 1997 to today. Yeah, so today we are able to master the total view of the things that you are going to see now in a quick overview that Michel is going to give. And there will be some repetition in it, but that it's easier to understand what it is. Voilà, Michel, what is yours?
Michel, we have to go a bit quickly through the slides because time is running.
I know. I would say Anna Mabsoutawi, because I asked Ludo, stick to your time, because once Ludo starts to talk about intellectual capital, he can continue till tomorrow morning. And I know that the audience is, I suppose, very heterogenic, that we have people from accounting, that we have people from HR, that we have people from from several parts of a company. So, for example, what I would like to do is, do you see the presentation actually?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So, well, you know that that person that is on the slide, very intelligent one. It's, for me, it's one of the topics, intellectual capital. Well, this person, when you talk about intellect, he was one of the top guys, in my opinion. But I will guide you through a number of, how would I call it, wordings that were used. You see here by Eugen McDonald. What is intellectual capital? Just have a look in it, because we will share the slides with you, that so that you can grasp them. And anyhow, if you have questions later on, don't hesitate, certainly don't hesitate to contact us and to ask more information about it, because we are aware that it's something out of the box, so it's not well, it's not easy to grasp it from the first time you see it. So one of the things you should have a look at, that's what Ludo was talking about, the market value. When you talk about the selling, for example, your company, and I always give the example, and I have an accountant and I'm very pleased with what he is doing, but in fact, he's only looking into the past. He's driving his car and looking into his back mirror. Because he's making my VAT, my balance sheet once a year, but he's not taking a look into the future value of my company. So I'm very pleased with what he is doing, but if one day I want to sell my company and I go to an accountant, and I ask him, well, what is the future value of my company? Then he will start with discounted cash flow models and dividend discount models and whatever you name it. But if you can add, and I will show you the balance sheet at the end of the presentation, and I will manage to keep in the time frame, then you will see that if you can add intellectual capital on your balance sheet, that when you discuss with a person and you start from a classical balance sheet where Ludo was talking, and it's worth 100 and he wants to pay 990. So when you start by adding your intellectual capital, and you can start from 130 or 140 as a value, then perhaps he will say, okay, I will only pay 120, but 120 is still 30 more than 90. Also, from the opposite side, if you want to buy a company and you see that the old classical value is 100, and you ask, for example, you asked us to do a study, a due diligence and high-level estimation, etc., and you know that in fact the company is worth already 130. So then you buy 100 and you know it's worth 130 already. I will guide you through a number of things, but take your time to read it. It's not only about the things that are written here, but I will also give you examples of, for example, the bakery on the corner of the street. They have intellectual capital when they have tacit and explicit. For example, if the baker starts to write down his the recipes, well, then he is making from his tacit knowledge explicit knowledge. And so I don't wish he becomes ill, but he needs surgery. He will be out for 2 months. So people will still can continue to use these recipes and make the same bread, make the same cookies, make the same pastry. And his concolleague, he didn't do that. And after a couple of weeks, people say, well, the quality is not the same anymore. And we will go somewhere else. So everybody has intellectual capital. I'm thinking about the people from HR that are in the audience today. What we can do is, by calculating the value of intellectual capital of an HR department, we can even make it a profit center instead of a cost center. And I know HR is a very important thing because they are managing one of the most important assets of your company, that's your people. So that's something we can do. Well, here, many insights, especially for the accountants, information technologists, sociologists. How can they, by any means, calculate intellectual capital if they don't follow a certain way of working? Then for me, one of the most important slides in the presentation for me is this one, because we all start about bits and bytes, data, big data. And here it is described how you can make from information and knowledge, you can make it intellectual capital. And when you hire a person, for example, it is important. Well, you are not hiring for what he did in the past. Well, he has some experience, but you want to hire him for what he can do for you. So you hire him for his abilities to do some projects, but you hire him also for his network, for the people he knows, perhaps customers he can bring with him. But if you don't ask him to put the names of his network into the CRM tool of your company, well, then that tacit knowledge, it remains tacit. And if in 2 years, 10 years, the person is leaving the company to go and work somewhere else, well, he is taking that knowledge again with him. And so you cannot use it into the future. Then I refer to what Ludo said about the future value that is needed for those assets. So it's all about knowledge, because even when you look at the history of the companies, and a couple hundred years ago, we were all working in the fields. Then we had the Industrial Revolution, and then we started to work in factories. And now more and more we are talking about the third and the fourth sector we are working in. It's about services. And even companies that are creating tools and cars and whatever, well, this is all about knowledge, because even those constructing factories, they are knowledge factories. So here you have a couple of views of what knowledge can be, where you can find it, what it is. You can find it everywhere. And so one of my favorite questions when we are doing a high-level estimation is, show me. So it is good to have ideas, but if you have that idea in your head and tomorrow you will be sick and you cannot come to the office, or you will get pensioned or whatever, you take it away with you. So what is important? Write it down, put it in a mail, put it in a database, put it on a SharePoint. And one of the things we say to make your knowledge reusable is safeguard it somewhere, eventually protect it. And then we are talking about the IP part of things. And if you put it in a SharePoint or in a specific tool, then other people, your colleagues, tomorrow, if you're not there, they can use it. And so you make the knowledge from the people reusable. And that's important because otherwise you will be stuck somewhere because a certain part of the knowledge is missing. And so Ludo was talking about the key knowledge carriers. And in fact, these are the most important people in your company when you talk about intellectual capital. And I always laugh about it, but when you talk about the CEO, well, that's the Chief Executive Officer. He can be replaced. He's not aware of what is happening on the floor. And I know his task is important and he's managing a lot of things, but it's about the key knowledge carriers that are bringing the added value to the products you make, to the services you offer, etc., etc. So as I told you a couple of minutes ago, turn your knowledge that is in the head of the people, that is somewhere even on a laptop, but on a personal laptop, make it reusable, put it in libraries, etc., etc. So I want to show you a couple of people that are in fact some important people into the history of intellectual capital. And well, I want to tell you about the one on the right side on top. That's Leif Edvinsson. And Leif always says that he is the godfather of intellectual capital, but he always also mentioned about Ludo, that Ludo is the future of intellectual capital. So have a look. Also, Jan Moritzen is well known, but have a look at those. Well, all the gurus. and there is one missing, of course, but we have the pleasure to have him here in the call. It's Ludo. So here is a model that gives you a little view on the different approaches with the no monetary valuation and the monetary valuation. And a lot of our colleagues working in intellectual capital will tell you, well, your intellectual capital is worth 14 out of 20. But what is that 14 worth in hard euros, dollars, Malaysian ringgit, you name it, whatever? How can you do something with it with a 14 out of 20? Well, if they will use the same methodology to measure it, and they will come back in 2 years and they will tell you you have 16. Okay, then you are aware that your company is worth more, but how much? You just don't have a clue. And so that's why that's one of the possibilities, one of the reasons where we differ with our, well, I don't call it competitors, but I call it conculeagues, that we can put all that intellectual capital, we can change it and put it in a hard economic value. And so when you talk to a CFO, to a CEO, and that's what we see every day, when you talk the language of money, then they listen. Then you have hard arguments you can discuss with them. So there is a lot of, you have a lot of approaches to measuring intangibles. You have the direct intellectual capital methods, return on assets, market capitalization. You also have the scorecards. So have a look at it. Well, one of the things is you will find certainly a correlation between the score that they will give you and the results of your company. For example, I always talk about, of course, you know, it's important to have a good customer satisfaction, but also your employee satisfaction is very important. And even then, we can measure it. And then we talk not only about the wages the people get, the cars they get, the light that is coming into the offices, but also is the work that we have to do, is it nice? Do we like it? Is my boss a nice guy? Is the quality of the coffee good? Is the floor and are the workspaces clean? Because otherwise, before we will talk about the football, we will talk about the cleanliness of the offices. And so then you will lose time. And then it's important that all those things, you can consider them in to what I was calling your employee satisfaction. So now for the accounting world, it's very important that we can turn that score where I was talking about 14 out of 20 or 16 out of 20, and that we can put it, that we can change it into a monetary value. It's perhaps it's not very clear to see, but the last bullet point, I put it in a little higher character mode. So when you talk about money, it will enhance the capability to see where are your hidden values, and it will make it easier to let them invest or buy a joint venture, share swap, or whatever that you call it, if they have a view on how you can perform into the future. And then the basic Bible out of that is, it's the Bible of the auditors. It's the International Accounting Standard 38 on intangible assets. I will not dig into that much deeper because it will become, for non-accountants, it will become too technical. And so based on all that, we divided the intellectual capital in 4 types. It's the human capital, the orange here, you see the HC. Well, I don't have to explain you the human capital. You have the strategic alliance capital, on the left side under. Well, strategic alliances, that is, well, it's about my network, the people I know, and we have a measure system where we give a score on people that, well, I know them from LinkedIn, I'm linked with them, but I don't know them, to people that are just one phone call away. And so based on all those possible people that you know in your network, we can identify and give a value on the network and on the people you know. In red, you have the customer capital. And your customer capital, well, that's the lifetime of your customers. And so one of those things is, if a customer is happy, can we make him a long-time customer? Will he buy other things? Will he do some can we do some cross-selling with him, etc.? And then, of course, you have the structured capital. And structured capital is, well, only a small part of that is IP. That's intellectual property. And you will see that when you dig into intellectual capital, it's only 1% of your intellectual capital. And based on those 4 leaves, if you put them, you superpose them, you have just one category in the middle where the 4 types of intellectual capital are gathered, and all the others is a mixture of 2 or 3 kinds of intellectual capital. Well, you see here the Areopa 4-leaf model. We have the 15 IC areas. Then we check what the added value is. We look at the IC assets. We go to balance sheet. And if you want to implement, as Ludo said, an accounting system, then you have to measure. And every quarter when you make a new balance sheet, well, you have to put all those measurements on your balance sheet. So this is not something that can be done by the bakery on the corner. Then you already need a scale-up company, what we call an S3, starting from S1. These are the pizza boys that are working in a garage or on an attic, to the S6, and that are the blue chips, the Apples and the Microsofts, etc. I told you about the correlation when you calculate your IC. There is a clear correlation between the intellectual capital, the revenues, and also the costs. Well, you see that if you can turn this into money, it's much easier to say, well, my intellectual capital is worth 5 million instead of it has been growing 2 out of 20 over the last 3 years. Ludo already told you about our 10-step methodology where we identify, we estimate, safeguard, protect the IP. We manage the intellectual capital. We do that by a knowledge manager inside that help you to safeguard and to pull, in fact, the knowledge out of the people, way of speaking, of course, and put it somewhere on a SharePoint or in another tool. Well, we want also to reveal some things about the formulas we have. I am not going to dig into that too deep, but this is an approach on how we calculate. Just for example, the yellow part, the human capital on this sheet. It's well, I learned a lot in 2004 when I was working on those formulas, because you start to watch a number of things, and even when you don't talk about intellectual capital, you take it with in your head, in the way of thinking on how can I do it, how can I safeguard it, what should I do, how should I do it, etc., etc. I will not dig into this calculation of that human capital, but this slide and the next one, we just want to show you the fundamentals of accounting and the fundamentals of IC, intellectual capital accounting, as we took it to the same level, because we wanted, well, accountants or other people to compare it. And if we would come with a completely other manner of showing it, there was probably nobody that would understand us. And so what we did is, and if you see my other screen already popping up, then you see that you have a balance sheet that is appearing. And so what we did, in fact, is we added on the classical balance sheet, and Ludo already referred to it, that the only way, the only place, in fact, that you could hide, if I can call it that way, your intellectual capital was under the goodwill. And I like the words what Ludo is always using, a company's word, what a fool wants to pay for it. And for that reason, we added, in fact, in the same way of thinking, so that we could consolidate, in fact, the new balance sheet on the intellectual capital and the old balance sheet based on the costs, that we could consolidate it and have a complete view on the value of your company. And when I talk value, I want to state it again. Then we talk about the future value, because it's what the people can do, what they are able to create for your company. It's about what they can do, how flexible they are, and what they can do to make your customers happy, to create new products, new money streams, license your models, and take a leverage, etc., etc. Okay, so this is another view on those IC balance sheets, and then the consolidated one, where you have the intellectual capital, liabilities, equity, etc., gathered in just one overview that is readable for people that can read a balance sheet. So I have a first challenge. Well, after today, your job will never be the same again, because you will now consider, or start to consider, the possibilities of intellectual capital. Of course, if you want to know more, you know how to reach us. And just one thing, a second challenge is, now that you know what is possible, well, or you don't know yet, but my goal was that perhaps you had some questions about intellectual capital, and I wanted you to have more questions about intellectual capital, but other ones. So what's in it for me? What can I do with intellectual capital? How can I use it? How can I increase my value? How can I use it to go to take over a company, a competitor, etc., etc.? How can I do it? The last slide there, you can see the contacts. You can contact Ludo, you can contact Mohammed, you can contact myself. And so I think we have a short time for Q&A now.
Thank you so much, Michel, and thank you so much, Ludo, for this very comprehensive session. And now we'll open the stage for any questions. Can you please, Michel, put the last slide? We'll have contact, please. So if anyone has any questions regarding what we're talking about. Okay. I think one of the main things that I've always been thinking about is, for me as HR person, you said before that for HR, it can take you from cost center to profit center. Okay. So how can you do that? If I'm HR manager, how can I use the intellectual capital to prove that I'm profit center, not cost center?
Okay. So,
yeah.
okay. Ludo, you can add some things because I
Yeah.
don't want to intervene with my guru, as I call you always. First of all, you have to do a zero meeting your benchmark. And then if you, for example, you hire a person, then you start to scratch all his knowledge and you make it explicit. So that then it becomes measurable and it gets a certain value. And so if you do that, and especially for your key knowledge carriers, the guys that are really the production heart of your factory or your services, and by doing that on a regular basis, you will see that their intellectual capital value will increase. And so by doing that, you can put it on the balance sheet. And then your profits and your HR, and don't understand me wrong, it is a cost, but I know the capital that it's worth. But it's not in figures, it's not in euros, it's not in dollars, it's not in pounds. But then you make it, you give it a monetary value, and then you can do it and you can put it on your balance sheet, and you will see the increase of the value of your HR department.
Well, can I add a few things to that? For example, one of the major things, the two major things that I always say to make it easy, what an HR department does is recruitment and training, right?
Yeah.
So in that sense, what it does is if you recruit a person, you saw that formula that Michelle showed you. And if you recruit a person, remember I said it is networks, experience, skills, intelligence, motivation, blah, blah, blah. Now this is all tacit. Imagine that you do the equation from a recruited person and it's worth 100,000 euro. On that moment, that 100,000 euro is tacit. Now that comes in the organization. The responsibility of an HR department is to make sure that parts of that assets, for example, the networks, the experience, should be captured, stored, and made reusable so it can stay in the company even if that person would leave. Yeah, and in that sense, what it then does is that on that moment, you are turning tacit into explicit. And you see the value going up. That's due to the interventions of HR department. Now, if you on top of that are going to teach the people new skills, sales skills, management skills, etc., yeah, and they are going to use it, on that moment, their value will go up. And that if you can tell that in a euro value, you can put it on a balance sheet. Both, recruitment, turning tacit into explicit, you can put it on the intellectual capital balance sheet. If you train people, the new knowledge used in the business processes, you can put it tacit, explicit on the balance sheet. And in that sense, you can even make a return on investment calculation at the end of the year of what HR departments have done, that their contribution in value for the company is much higher than their costs. And imagine that you can do that, then you are a profit center.
That's great. That's great. Because always this is the debate with the management, especially in these days, because what happened in these days, two main things happened. First thing is that many organizations are laying off people, okay? So whenever you are laying off, so you say, I need 30% off or 50% off or lay all this department, okay? So this is how can people calculate the risk?
That's a good one. Because laying off is a very dangerous thing, because most of the times people are laid off based on their costs.
Yeah.
But, Michelle referred many times to key knowledge carriers. Key knowledge carriers are people who have fundamental knowledge for the organization. That are typically the people who are in more creative environment and say, you have to make a proposal. Oh, I remember that 5 years ago we had it also, and he digs in and he comes up with an incredible solution that nobody ever expected, right? Now imagine that you have this kind of people and you see that they are laid off. On that moment, if I'm an investor and I see that, then I say, wow, big panic, because that knowledge center person, the key knowledge carriers, they are irreplaceable because their knowledge is tacit. You don't have that on the market. Work center people, you can find them on the market. For example, if I have to recruit an accountant who is specialized in FECO of SAP, for example, I can hire them on the street. They are available. So they have 85% explicit knowledge, easy. If they are laid off, I can replace them afterwards very easily. If you lay off a key knowledge carrier, you have to rehire him afterwards because you need his knowledge again. Yeah, and you have to pay them 4 times the guy. Yeah, so in that sense, we have seen that in many cases that we did, where it was you call the department, and that was in South Africa, and an electricity company. They laid off the companies who were they were before working with subcontractors, and the subcontractors, they on a certain moment were stopped. They were going to do it themselves. And they didn't know how to do it themselves. And of course, the knowledge was all with the subcontractors, right? And if they go there, right, and they say, subcontractors, can you tell us? They say, no. And there you go. And you had a big, huge problem. So that kind of stuff, it was on that moment a loss for that company. You wouldn't believe it, right? So that are practical applications, small ones, that you can use and show on the table what it can do, right?
Yes, that's very important, because sometimes many people, maybe they are not very knowledgeable about what you're talking about, the balance sheet and all these very nice things for accounting. I'm not an accountant, but I can feel what you're talking about, because at the end of the day, people have value. So if you lay off one of these valuable, knowledgeable people, you are shooting yourself in your foot.
Of course, Mohammed, but every manager that I know in my life always said to me, my most important assets are my people. And then I asked them the question, and where are they on the balance sheet? They are there as costs, not as value, right? How wrong can you be, right? So in that sense, if your most important asset, the definition of an asset, yeah, that is value, and it is not what that's not a cost. On that moment, you can see them, how they are dealt with. So in that sense, there is quite a lot of things that needs to be reinterpreted. That's the only thing we need to do. But we have to use the things that we have. We have the measure systems and the measure tools to talk the language that they are used to talk, right? And suddenly it becomes very obvious, and we talk the knowledge, and we talk the language of money. And if you talk the language of money, yeah, you always win.
Yes, right. That's the key thing. We have Mr. Praveen who wants to ask a question.
Hi, thank you so much, Michelle and Lou. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. There was so much to think about. Wanted to ask you the value of a person here, the tacit knowledge becoming explicit knowledge. That is kind of contradictory, because in this part of the world, the minute you are able to record all the value that is there in a person to make it explicit knowledge, you might even be laid off, be redundant. Therefore, people try not to make their tacit knowledge explicit. So how do you work around that?
No, that's a classical one, that everybody says, let's keep it, and nobody talks about it. But you have to think a little bit further. Tacit knowledge has no value if you cannot implement it into a business process. So the key element is the business process and not the person itself. So if somebody says, I am so important, yeah, that I can go to my boss and say, if you lay me off, I need a Lamborghini as company car, otherwise I go, then let them go. I mean, the business process, the other people in the business process who are just before him and after him, they also learn from him. And the big trick is, of course, always the big message is always make sure that you enjoy a sharing knowledge in the business process solutions. And that goes automatically, because if you have in a business process on a certain moment, the problem, on that moment, that individual who says, I know how to do it, but I don't tell you, I'm not going to do anything, yeah, that guy will be laid off, obviously. But the normal people, they say on that, mom, no, let's do it like this and that and those, and they teach the other ones. So that is what I say. It is a theoretical concept, you're right, but in practice, yeah, the environment in which it happens, it is not correct to think like that. On the other hand, there is also another issue. If you manage your company based on intangible asset management, like it should be, and now I'm talking from the standpoint of a manager, and you would do that you say, well, I'm going to try to steal the knowledge of the people and then we lay them off. Yeah, that is a little bit crazy, because you have to start each time again with a new one that you have to then recapture in again. Then it's a lot of rework. So in that sense, it's not interesting to do it neither. On top of that, if you do it respectful, in that you say, well, if we can capture your tacit knowledge, which is critical for our organization, I don't mind to give you a salary raise. Yeah, why not? Or a compensation in one or another way. Yeah, why not? Because the value of your company will increase by doing it. Why shouldn't you compensate it? Yeah. So it is, if you either go into the fighting mood, or what we call in the dynamic homeostasis. Dynamic homeostasis means incorporating that threat into knowledgeable management, right? Yeah, we don't live in the Middle Ages anymore. Yeah.
Thank you very much. That was wonderful.
Perhaps I can add a case we did for Eandis, Ludo, where we had to calculate the value of two persons. There was an interim manager and a guy that was there for 6 or 7 years, I don't remember correctly, and they wanted to replace him by a more junior person because there was a difference. It was about 200 or 250 euros a day. So meaning, if you calculate 200 working days in a year, it was a difference in costs about 40,000, 50,000 euros on yearly basis. But then we proved that the person that was there for 6 years already, he had a complete network in the company, that he knew the procedures well, and that to bring up to speed the youngster, if I can call him that way, it would cost you more than those 40 or 50,000 euros a year. So conclusion was, keep the more expensive one, because he has more value. So all those things we can do.
Great. Thank you very much. That was a wonderful explanation. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. The other question that also I have, it's about also because of the current situation, so many people, many organizations have stopped training, stopped any consulting works, because they want to reduce their costs. And they believe that training is just something for fun or for people going to training, coming back. They don't really see the value.
Yeah.
Okay.
But that means that the basic concept of training is already wrong as in the beginning. If training is only to give people an incentive because they worked hard, well, hey, you can go to a nice hotel and have fun there. And no. Training is something that has to be done related again to the business processes. You should, if you only think in terms of costs, right? Business processes are full of, and that you remember, tape. Yeah, they are not timely, they are not accurate, they are not productive, and in seldom they are efficient. 30% rework, 25% non-productive, 12% not timely and accurate. Now, the only way to solve this is to start managing the knowledge and start restructuring the processes. So only remember our little equation, added value minus costs. Now imagine that you don't do anything on the added value, but you can reduce the costs, then you will increase the intellectual capital of your organization. Now that little equation is something that shows that only looking at cost reduction, in a smart way. We are not laying off people, we are saying we are not going to do rework anymore, meaning doing double work. Yeah, that is crazy to do it, right? Well, if you do that, then you're on the right track. So in that sense, it's turn it in upside down, all kind of directions. It is the game between what we call value creation and costs. and that is something that most of the people mix up. Yeah, they think that value, that is not something that exists. That's an investor who puts money on the table. That's not true, because value is created by a lot of things, right, for the organization. It can be created by investment money. It can be created by your revenue that you have, your financial assets. It can be created by information technology. Yeah, that are elements that can create it, but you have still to create it. If you don't do that, it doesn't happen by itself. It doesn't happen by itself. So in that sense, this is a breakthrough thinking that we put on the table by combining costs with and saying, go away from the costs, talk about value creation, right? Added value creating phenomena, 77 that there are, minus the costs to create them. And then you have a very clear view on how you should manage your organization. And in many cases, if you don't do it like that, yeah, what are you then doing? You're a bad manager. You don't even know what to look at. You have to, there all the assets that an organization have, especially in an innovative knowledge company, should be managed in the way that we just described. If you go to manufacturing, there it are the machines that are doing it. But in a knowledge company, it are the people who are doing it. So in that sense, it doesn't need much explanation to say, well, let's focus on the people, yeah, to do that.
Yeah. It's very interesting, especially it really breaks my heart when I was just talking with one of the organizations. They want to have a new IT system, okay? And the new CEO, he wants to renovate the whole company and he wants to implement automation everywhere. So go for digital transformation. But what was really breaking my heart that they don't have processes in place. They don't have KPIs for the organization or the departments. And they don't have, people are not well trained, but they need to build system. And they're willing to invest in this automation, but they are not willing to invest in any other aspect.
Yeah. Let me tell you what happened. People didn't use this new IT system. Yes. People were not using it. Because what you don't know is that people think by automating everything that you can solve all the problems, but everybody knows that they are creating more problems than they solve. And if you would use it to solve tape elements, timeliness, accuracy, productivity, and efficiency issues, you can do that with especially non-productivity and non-efficiency. You can do that with information technology, but you can only increase your performance with 8% and not more. There are many drivers of change. Yeah, there is not only IT. Yeah, and that is something that most of the people don't understand. That's what I said. If you are a manager, you have to manage all your assets and not IT only or money only. Yeah, no. You have to be able to manage the total organization, and that is something that is in many cases wrong. That most of the organization, the managers don't know that they are too focused or not intelligent enough to see that they have to manage everything. And that's the reason why we come up with measure systems that shows it. That you cannot look beside it. You say, hey, look, guys, you're 80% tacit. We have examples. If you go, for example, to banks and you take, for example, the market cap of a bank or the market cap of Tesla or the market cap of Microsoft, and you look at their balance sheet and you take off all the tangible assets that they have on the balance sheet, right? So give you an example with Tesla, 9% is tangible assets of their total market cap, right? That means that 92% is intangible assets and they are not managed. What are you then doing? I mean, and that's true for every company. Yeah, that's true for every company. That's very easy. It's a very easy exercise. You take any company, you take their balance sheet, you take the market cap, what the fool wants to pay for it on the stock exchange, and you identify the tangible assets, the buildings and everything like that. And the difference between those two, you ask them, and what are you managing now? How are you managing it? They will say, we don't. Well, but that are your intangible assets that you don't manage. You say, okay, good, great, good manager. Yeah. Yeah, we'll fire you, then we earn a lot of money. Yeah, so that's good.
I remember one story you told me before, Ludo, and always still in my head more than 10 years ago, about the consulting company that you were valuing because they want to sell it for 1 million euro, right?
Yeah.
Can you please tell us this story? Because this story is really very insightful.
Which one was that again? Because I have many in the meantime.
They wanted to sell it for 1 million euro.
Oh yeah. That was the one. Yeah. That's the one in France. Yeah, that purchasing company. Well, it was actually, the story goes like this. There was a guy who had a company in purchasing techniques, and he was a guru, and he had around 20 people working for him, and he he was retiring on a certain moment. He said, I'll quit. And the way that he defined the price of the company was the following. He said, I worked a lot in my life, and I never had a beautiful house. So I will buy a beautiful house that's 5 million euros. I will buy a beautiful apartment for my girlfriend. That's 1 million. I will give my kids some money and beautiful cars and stuff for each 1 million, so 3 million. Yeah. I will buy my wife, etc. And I want to have a yacht. And so finally he came to 20 million. And then he went to his accountant and he said, well, I want to sell my company for 20 million. And the accountant, he fell on the floor from laughing. And he said, you know what? He said, yeah, your book value is 1.6 million. Yeah. Well, that's not possible, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Now, on that moment, there was a guy who wanted to buy the company. And when he looked at those two figures, 20 million and 1.5, he said both are wrong. And that was the moment that we came in. And what we then did is we said, you know what, we are going to capture and store and make reusable the knowledge inside. Because for the moment, that company is actually worth nothing, because that is based on costs, those 1.5 million and 20 million are fairy tales. So there is no underlying asset. So let's capture the knowledge first, store it, make it reusable, which we did. And we agreed with the purchaser that he would pay 50% of the value that we calculated to take it over. So finally, we did that after a year. We came to 4.8 million. So the guy paid 2.4 million, yeah, for the company. And you know what the guy said? He could have bought it for 1.5, but he said, no, the company was not worth 1.5, but it is worth 2.4, he said. Because on that moment, he knew what he was buying. The assets that he was buying were on that moment visual. He could see them, they were there. Before, he couldn't see them, they were tacit. Yeah. That's the story. That's the one that you wanted to hear, right? Yeah.
Especially because many people working in consulting, working in teaching, working in many places.
Yeah.
Where they don't have any assets, I mean, fixed assets, but they're all about the knowledge of the people, their intellectual capital, and all these things. So we need really to look at things from different perspective.
Exactly.
So hopefully today we had shed some lights on the non-tangible part and how can we really measure it and can assess it. I know also that I know before that we already have a good system for making an assessment for the whole company and measuring the non-tangible assets, and you can give an estimate, rough estimate about the company, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah. That's correct.
So hopefully this can be also one of the tools that
we can do. We can do the next time, because it will take a while to explain that in detail. That looks like, and then we can show some cases for the people who want to participate a second time. Yeah, no problem.
Okay, great. So any questions? I'd like to thank you so much, Ludo. Thank you so much again for your time today. And it was really amazing to have you here after this long time and talking about different aspects about how can we measure the non-measurables and how can we measure the non-tangible assets. So thank you so much, and looking forward to have another meetings with you, inshallah, and wish you good evening, and hopefully we can meet soon again.
Okay, let's do that. Thank you. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
شكراً
It's
للشيخ.
pleasure. Thank you.
Bye-bye.